Hey there, and welcome to the Hit Like a Girl podcast. My name is Joy Rios, and today my guest is Eileen Martin. Eileen is a healthcare executive who has a global impact with respect to driving change in corporate social responsibility and employee engagement. She is super inspirational, and I have to admit I learned a lot through talking with her, and I think you will too. So let's get started.
I'm Eileen Martin. I'm the Global Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at EMD Serono. We're a healthcare company, and our parent company is Merck KGaA out of Darmstadt, Germany.
Okay, so you must have a large footprint, I would imagine. And when I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, it says, Global Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So can we talk about what that, does that mean that you get to be responsible for DEI all over the world?
Yes. So my responsibilities include, Latin America, Asia Pacific, Europe, North America, and the focus for my role initially was gender parity. And of course, it has grown to all facets of diversity, equity, and inclusion beyond gender parity into the race and ethnicity space, the LGBTQ space, inclusion, belonging, unconscious bias. All of that came under my wheelhouse after I was appointed to this role.
So what are some of the different problems that are, how is it different perhaps in Germany or Latin America? Like what are the different challenges with DEI? I imagine it's not the same as, it might be similar, but not the same as what we experience in the States.
It's such an interesting question because, of course, the race piece is incredibly challenging in North America, and we don't have that as much of a challenge in other countries. But I will caveat that by saying in China, for example, most pharmaceutical companies have many Asian talent, but they don't have Asian talent in leadership. They typically import their talent from Europe. So, in many of the Asian countries in leadership and healthcare companies, it's imported European talent. So, we're trying to flip that. And we're trying to get more Asian nationals into leadership within our organization. And the same thing for women in leadership. Women in leadership in North America, we're making strides here. But in places like Latin America and China, there are different barriers. Germany, you brought up as a great example. Angela Merkel, when she came into office, we felt that Germany and getting more women into leadership was just going to flip on its head with having her being in charge of the country. When in fact we haven't seen a lot of changes for the women in Germany because there's still this culture, economics, rules on the books that actually date back to the Hitler era that actually culturally women who have children and go back to work are called raven mothers. Ravens leave their babies in the nest. Um, there are actually laws on the books that are tax advantages for women staying at home after they have children. So each country you have to go in and really problem solve where you're at and where the country is at and where the culture is at.
That is so interesting. And so I imagine there's perhaps, sounds like a stigma tied to women who go back to work.
It's a really strong stigma, particularly in Germany, and also, we also see women in India struggling with. Yes, they might be supported going back to work, but they still have that extraordinary burden. We call it. We have an initiative called Embracing Carers. They're still doing the large part of the caregiving. They're still doing the laundry and the meal preparation and the doctor's appointments for the children and meeting with the teachers. So places like India, women are still disproportionately carrying that burden more so than even in America.
I'm really curious about is, and I don't know how to frame this accurately, but this is what's on my mind. And it really has to do with men who have been in positions of power for a really long time because of the way that the rules have just been set up. How do you manage, or how do you handle, let me think, like how do you navigate them feeling like they're losing something by women gaining something or any other minority gaining something. There's a little bit of like, how do you make it feel like a win-win, like we're not taking something away from them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think when my colleague and I first started Women in Leadership, that we thought, okay, this is going to be for women, by women, no men involvement. This is going to be like our sorority at work. And we almost instantaneously realized that was going to fail because we needed men as allies. And what we have found is that when you share the data latently in your organization, it's a bit of a wake up call because it's the first time that we're seeing our organization looking at our leadership by role levels. And when we first did that in North America, one of the executives said, "Well, that is surprising to me because I see women around me all day long, but they're not in the boardroom with him." So
Mhm.
it's looking at the data, it's being accountable for the data.
Okay, so name that or name the club again. Is it the
So yeah, so it's an internal network. It's Women in Leadership Allies.
allies?
And now allies are trying to also link up with our LGBTQ employee resource group, as well as our Leaders of Color, Black Leadership Network, North American Asian Network, and our OLA, which is our Latinx and Hispanic ERG.
I love that. So is that okay? I know it's internal and something you guys are using within your organization, but is it something that is it a model that could be shared? Is it something that other people could pick up on because hey, we could look at your organization as doing a really good job in their efforts and leading the way for other folks to follow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because what we found is that men would say, "What do you want me to do? What can I do?" And we started training them on unconscious bias and how to amplify a woman's idea in a room and how to be consciously aware of the female talent around them and how to nudge women gently when you see an opportunity on your team and you think, "God, Joy would have been a really good fit. I wonder why she didn't apply." Joy's waiting to be asked. A lot of times women are waiting to be asked. And I love to compare the analogy that we waited to be asked to go to the prom. We waited to have somebody ask us to dance. We waited for our partners to ask us to marry them. Women have to stop waiting to be asked. We have to nudge each other. We have to lean into our allies to nudge us ourselves. And we have to also pull together. I always say I pull from behind until like my arms are about to fall off, and with a very heightened respect for women of color as well, because as our numbers increase in the boardroom as CEOs, it's white women who are
Yeah.
advancing, and our sisters of color are largely being left behind. So we need to advocate for them as well.
I love that. I love that it's just creating an example because it's some one thing to just talk about it and say this is what we want to do, and it's an entirely different thing to actually take the action steps and show people. Basically, like stop talking, just show them instead of telling them. I I really truly love that, and I also the thing that's coming up for me is in learning how to communicate what it is you want or going after something that you dream of, you also have to kind of get better at hearing the rejection or no. Like it's okay to ask and be told no, but that doesn't mean you should stop asking. And
Absolutely. And ask for the feedback. How could I
yeah,
have shown up better? What should I do next time? I'm in the process of helping a woman at our organization who's applying for a very big role. And what I'm most proud of is that she's going for it. But what makes me even more proud is that one of our white male European leaders picked up the phone and said, "Here's an opening. I think you should go for it." So those are the actions that men can take to bring gender parity forward.
I love that. And there's got to be more of ways, and it's something I've been actively working on too, of like, how do you bring people in on it? How does it become something that they get excited about and not feeling like something is being taken from them, right?
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
instead of it being like, oh, you're losing seats at the table, like hopefully we're just creating a longer table.
Exactly. And that's in fact what a lot of the companies are doing in North America. They're adding women to the boards. It's not women gain one, men lose one. It's just make the table longer and bring some folding chairs up to the
Exactly.
table.
I love that. So
Yeah.
can you, I really do. Can you speak a little bit about some of your big wins? Like maybe in countries around the world where you just feel like, oh, that was, I don't know, something that to be proud of.
Yeah, I would say there are so many that our company, it takes a village, and there are so many countless volunteers in our organization who take this work on top of their full-time job. I would say in North America, for example, um, the colleague of mine who we were on an action team. So our CEO had a women in leadership action team that I was leading, and it was executives around the world to identify, what can we do to get more women into leadership? And this one person who was on my action team, she is a Black woman from Canada. She became such a huge integral part of that team and really stepped up. And after she saw the impact that we had in women leadership in the gender space, she said, I want to do the same thing for people of color. So let's take women in leadership and let's launch a Leaders of Color Action Network. And sure enough, that's what she did.
So what about, okay, so yeah, as you get closer to parity and as you're looking at the data on a regular basis, is there any shift in the outcomes or I don't know, like just levels of production or whatever? What kind of shifts in like the results have you
Mhm.
seen based on, the shift in the change in balance of, gender or people of different ethnic races?
So I would say that some of the things that we're looking at that seem to speak volumes about the success is retention of some of our top talent. And yes, during this crazy time of the Great Resignation, we have had some losses. But I would say for our high potential people of color, our loss rate has been incredibly low now that they have the support of not only leaders of color. We actually did launch our Leaders of Color Executive Sponsorship Program, so we have about 60 North American employees who now have a one-on-one relationship with an executive at our company. So that's helped with retention. It's helped with attraction too. There is something called the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index. And think of it as like a report card in the LGBTQ space and how your company is showing up. At first, the company was hesitant to even take the survey because, we're so proud of our over 350-year history. We don't want to get low scores on anything.
Hmm.
And myself and some of my HR peers really pushed for this and worked tirelessly to get this. And the first year we did it was 3 years ago, and we got a 90. It took us, we started it 3 years ago, so we got a 90 2 years ago. And then we tweaked some of our internal policies, and last year we got 100. And
Okay.
a symbol, a metaphor, if you will, was at our headquarters last June in Darmstadt. They actually flew the rainbow flag
Oh,
for the first
wonderful.
time during
Good.
Pride Month. So it's we can look at the data and we see how we're moving in the data as far as attracting and developing and promoting talent. Also, the retention is important, but those symbols, those metaphors that are out there that are showing people that we hear them and that we're listening to their needs are critically
Well, and I
important as
think
well.
so it's so important for people to just be seen. A lot of times it's like to do just to be acknowledged that they exist and that they're okay in their existence and that they're included in the larger scheme of things, of just to be part of something.
To be seen and to be heard, that's
Yeah,
all anyone ever really wants, and to be valued, and
exactly.
feel that sense of belonging. Yeah, it's really important. The psychological sense of belonging. Super interesting data that has come out recently. I want to say it was Fortune or Forbes or Harvard Business Review, but um, the hybrid work model, that there are some call outs for the hybrid work model, particularly for women who are, embracing carers. They're doing more of the caregiving. I know myself, I've had to jump in with sick parents periodically, working full time, having my own children. It's quite a burden. Um, and at the same time, for women who right now are experiencing hybrid work, it seems to be working well for them. For Black and Brown people, some people don't want to go back to the office because maybe they're working in a place that they don't have that psychological safety. So the hybrid model maybe isn't going to work for them. So just being sensitive to who the hybrid model is working for. Is it working just for the white male who has a stay-at-home person at home taking care of everything so that they can show up at the office 100% of the time? And are we going to promote that person just because we see him versus his
Hmm.
output for somebody who's really essentially working their full-time job and then the part-time job of caregiving on top of all of that?
Yeah, I can
So that's just a call
definitely.
out.
I love that. I can relate to that with our team. We have a lot of moms, some single moms, and people that are doing the consulting work with us. And it's been nice to know that there's the flexibility. That ultimately, what we care about is, did the job get done well? Not like, did it happen between these certain hours, and did I get to monitor you or see you do it? Because that doesn't matter.
That doesn't matter. No. And again, go back to the data. Who's turning in the results and make sure that that is what you're thinking about during performance reviews.
Yes, I it's so smart. And it's not like, when you come at it from that framework, it's not that difficult to get different results. And it must be kind of mind-blowing to see, like, well, to have your eyes opened of like, oh, I didn't even switching from unconscious to conscious bias, or just being conscious of it. Be like, oh, it's a huge awakener. And
It
anyway.
is. It is. Yeah, there's a Harvard implicit bias test that you can Google and take that, and you can take it in different arenas. You can take it for LGBTQ, body image, gender, and you'll be surprised at some of the results. And they're aggregating the results, of course. So it's pretty cool and pretty powerful. And um, there's also a lot of good data on unconscious bias through Lean In as well that's out there. And PricewaterhouseCoopers has some great unconscious bias videos that are free.
Okay. We'll point listeners to them. I'd like to know a little bit about you and your personal journey. And one thing I would like to know is, like, did you have any idea that this would be your job when you were a kid, right? Like, when you were 10, what would 10-year-old Eileen think of what you're doing now?
Oh my gosh, 10-year-old Eileen, all she wanted to do was own her own dance studio. And I just would have thought that was absolutely amazing. And now I got into this space because I saw a problem and I was solutions oriented. And now I feel very privileged to be working in a job that I'm passionate about, that I can have an impact on people's lives, not just within the organization, but outside the organization. And it really is quite a privilege. It really is. And I if I would have told that 10-year-old self, um, you can do anything, you can be anything. That's what I want young women to hear. You can do anything, you can be anything, and don't be limited by your upbringing, by your education, because um, people see your talents and you can do anything.
Well, then I'll fast forward to, what advice would you give to your 23-year-old self? Somebody who's has a little bit more education under her belt and life experience. If you could have a conversation with 23-year-old Eileen, what would you tell her? Would it be the same advice?
I would tell 23-year-old Eileen, try to get mentors, try to get more sponsors, um, follow your strengths, always lean into your strengths. People love to point out our weaknesses, but let's really talk about leaning into our strengths. And to this day, I feel like what made me successful in my job at 25 is why I'm successful now. I'm passionate. I'm a collaborative leader. I lead with my head and my heart. And I would say that I was probably doing that in my initial jobs. I had the sneaky advantage of my first job out of college working for an all women's agency, the YWCA in Springfield, Massachusetts. And it was all female staff. Our board was female. Our executive director was female. So that really set me up for success in the future. And of course, that wasn't realistic that the rest of the world was going to be like that, but it certainly gave me the backbone um, that I have today.
I can totally relate to that, because my first job out of college was also with an all female organization. I got to work for a women's surfing magazine, like Professional Surfing. And it was like a women editorial, women in marketing, women in the photography section. And it was so cool to be surrounded by not only like professional women within our organization of what we were writing about and sharing the stories, but also following women professional athletes, around the world. That was very empowering for me as a young 20 in my early 20s.
It's incredible. It really is. And it's unfortunate that we can't give everyone that experience. But I would say that whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, whether you're, gender dysphoric, there's always the opportunity to amplify somebody else. And if somebody has a good idea in a meeting on Zoom, um, the Obama administration, the women in the Obama administration really brought this to the forefront of how important amplification is. So if somebody in the administration was a woman, she had a good idea. Another woman would say, I really like Joy's idea. Here's why. And then another person would kind of pile on. And suddenly the women were getting more traction in their careers, getting more visibility, and of course, getting credit for their ideas. So we can amplify each other, and we should be amplifying each other. And yeah, there are some things that we probably learned in high school that need to be unlearned,
Yeah.
competitiveness and comparing ourselves to women. No, we can, there's unlimited light out there. We can all shine together.
Well, and I also really like your idea of basically turning around and helping whoever's behind you. So, I mean, and then that can be different for everybody, no matter where you are. So, for male allies, amplifying women, for white women, amplifying women of color, and, going down the LGBTQ spectrum of just like wherever you are, we all have some form of privilege, whether we're aware of it or not. How can you
Yes,
turn around and help the next person?
absolutely. And I think that's when mentoring and sponsorship really come into play. And you can mentor in the workspace, but you can mentor outside of the workspace too. I volunteer for Big Sister Boston, so that is all about mentoring girls and impacting and influencing girls. And I actually am mentoring an early and career woman through Big Sister Boston, and really pulling from behind. And she's doing so well because she's purely talented. She's doing incredibly well, but I think getting the amplification through Big Sister and getting that exposure and getting connected with mentors is critically important, particularly for women and underrepresented people.
Yeah, I don't do any like official mentorship, but I feel like I'm out there and like playing this aunt godmother role in a lot of unofficial ways where I'm like, oh, I'm teaching my next door neighbor how to drive, and they never carved pumpkins before, and I'm like, come on, we're gonna go do that, and
That's a
just
mentor.
yeah.
That's a mentor. Yeah, it doesn't need to have a formal structure, but if you're positively impacting somebody else's life, you're mentoring them,
It does feel good. And I just love the
doesn't it?
concept. Yeah, it feels great. And I feel like it's more for just as much for me as it is for them. It's a real feel good activity to,
It is.
yeah. Well, I love that you've turned your career into something that must feel pretty good. I hope you sleep well at night knowing all of the impact that you're making.
I do. I really, really do. And there's still more work to be done. And we need everyone to be at work in this space, not just the folks who have a diversity, equity, and inclusion title.
Yeah.
We need the allies. We need the people in power, and together we'll get there. But it's just going to be keeping our foot on the gas pedal.
I agree. And before we close, there's one thing that showed up for me in going back into conferences, because I feel like when I first started this podcast, it was really driven by not having enough women on the stage, of like not really having a voice when it came to healthcare and health IT, that were like, hey, we're only listening to a certain spectrum of people, and that's not reflective of the real world. And as I've been going back to conferences, I noticed that there's this, more women on the stage, but then I'm also turning around and looking, okay, well, who's in the audience and who's listening to those women on the stage, and trying to have a bigger conversation. And one thing that I'm struggling with is like, okay, well, if there's now an all woman panel, we now are, sometimes preaching to the choir, because you'll look back and it's like all women in the room. And that's great. It's amazing to have the camaraderie and the support of one another. But ultimately, we need more men and male allies to be listening. Otherwise, like, what good is it going to do? Do you have any advice on that? Because I'm like, that's the next door I want to break down.
And it's such a perfect question because we have a Women in Leadership Summit every year. And we felt that way the first year. We thought, okay, well, we're just preaching to the choir. So through Will Allies, their job was to get more male leaders, not only on stage, but also in the audience to hear what it's like and to hear about the struggles and hear what we need. And I think you need to have the balance on the panel, you need to have a balance in the audience, and you need people who are willing to hear and listen.
Okay, well, there's still plenty of work to be done, but I am grateful for you and all that you're doing. So, thank you for taking this time to spend with me, for the opportunity to get to know you. If people want to work with you, follow you, or somehow, even be
Sure.
mentored by you or follow their organization's lead, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Fantastic. I am always checking my LinkedIn profile. So it's Eileen Martin. It's a much younger picture of me, but that's okay too. I'd be happy to help people set up an employee resource group, give them some direction. Um, this is where we don't really compete. This is a space where we all benefit from each other's best practices. So it would be my privilege.
I really love that concept. Well, I might reach out to you for that so that I can share it with a broader audience and we'll go from there. If you don't.
Fantastic. That would be great, Joy. Thank you.
Yes. Well, thanks again, Eileen. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.